Yeah, it's the Etruscans. So it's a temple of Minerva at Bay. Now, in terms of the date, you can either give a date by year, around 500 BCE, but with the Etruscans, remember, you can also cheat by using the same periods for Greek art. That makes it convenient. You can use something you learned in the first half of the class to help you out on an exam for the second half. So it would be archaic. Now, when you look at this, how does an Etruscan temple differ from Greek in the use of columns? Yeah, there's a base, the podium, right? And where are the columns here? Compare that to a Greek temple. What happens in a Greek temple with the columns? Well, where are they located? They're only in one part, right? Where are they? Yeah, they're only in the porch. Remember, a Greek temple is peripheral. That colonnade goes all around the temple. And if you look at this, at first glance, you would say that it's Doric, right? But it's not. It's actually the Tuscan ware. How do you know it's not Doric? What do you see at the bottom of these columns that clues you into that? What does this got that Doric doesn't? Okay, something that you need to check out. In terms of decoration, Greeks put statues on the pediment and on the frieze. Where's the decoration on this one instead? Right on the roof, right? And so, it also needed a change of materials because you're not going to put stone statues on your roof because they're going to come down if your roof gets wet or falls apart. It's going to land right on your head. So what are the figures on the roof actually made of? Sort of like the Bay Apollo. We saw that one example. Same thing as the sarcophagus of the married couple for that. Yeah, they're clay. So they're fired clay, they're hollow terracotta, and that makes it easier to support. In terms of building materials, too, remember Etruscan temples are, for the most part, not built to last. They only did that for their tombs. So you have brick, wood, other things that go to bits pretty easily. This, again, is a model because the original structure didn't survive. This is a reconstruction that archaeologists did based on their findings. Okay, this is Etruscan too. It's from a later period. So we could say that it's classical, or about 400 BCE. And what city was this found in? It originally was ruled by the Etruscans until the local folks booted them out and took over the joint for their own purposes. Yeah, it's from Rome. And there's two possibilities. We know the artist was Etruscan for sure. But there's two possibilities as to what ethnic group the patron, the guy who shelled out the cash for this bronze figure, came from. What are those? Well, what's the possibilities here at this time? I mean, you got these two groups. Well, that's who it could. Well, that could be what it refers to. But if it was intended to represent the wolf that nourished Romulus, what does that say about the patron then? Whose myth was that? So patron could be Roman, right? But it could also be Etruscan. In that case, it probably would have nothing to do with the story of the founding of Rome. But definitely the people who dug it up in the Renaissance thought that it was an image of the she-wolf who suckled Romulus and Remus. And they added these babies, which are not part of the original. Those were added to the Renaissance. So what we have today is sort of a composite. The wolf itself is Etruscan, but the babies are later add-ons because it was assumed that they represented the twins from the story. Okay, supposedly today someone is going to bring me a full set of Roman armor. Not authentic, I mean not dug up from some ancient tomb, but made by an armorer in the Central Valley in the 21st century Christian era. In the meantime, I have only this cheesy thing that wouldn't even guard me from the rain. So we're going into Roman art, and this is from the first period of Roman history we're concerned with. What do we call this period of time in Roman chronology that this work comes from? Very end of it, when it starts to fall apart.
High Empire?
No, not the High Empire. We're not even at any empire of any type so far. What was the first government of Rome after they threw the Etruscans out? Yeah, so it's a Roman Republic. It's a portrait of Pompey, and it's a very realistic style. I mean, this is not flattering. Dude's got multiple chins, furrowed brows, bags under his little beady, rodent-like eyes. What's the name for the in-your-face realistic style used in Roman art at this time for portraits? Begins with a V, the first of a word for truth. Okay, something you need to look up. And where did that style come from? Why were the Romans so interested in making very realistic portraits of people? What religious belief did this develop out of? Why were they interested in making identifiable images of folks and their families? Yeah, they worshiped their ancestors, and so originally they were probably making plaster death masks. And then, as they borrowed the art of stone carving from the Greeks, they translated this into sculpture. So you know that the guy portrayed here as Pompey. It was displayed in a theater that he built. So again, this is something that he paid for, he liked, he displayed in public to honor himself, but it's very realistic. Now, the only part of the statue here that corresponds to idealized Greek styles is his hair, which actually looks more like a toupee. It looks like a distant forerunner of Donald Trump here. That windswept hair is related to heroic portraits of gods and heroes, like you saw in Lysippos' image of Alexander. But the rest of it is very Roman, showing this guy warts and deficits and all in a realistic view of his face. Now we're in the early empire. We're in a Roman house. The house is at a site that is in very good shape, the buildings and the frescoes. What is the name of this site, and why has it survived in such an intact condition?
The house of the Betty.
Well, that's the house. What's the city? Yeah, and what happened to it? Wasn't very good for the folks who lived there, but it's really good for archaeologists and art historians. Yeah, the volcano Vesuvius exploded, buried the city in ash and pumice, killed a lot of folks, but it preserved the houses so that we can actually see things of daily life. And this is part of a Roman house. It's one of the two open courts there. What is this one called? It's the same name we use to describe a colonnaded Greek temple. What is it too? It has columns around it. Okay, something for you to check out. Now, these open parts of the house here were used for drainage. They were also used for air conditioning. And in this case, you have a decoration in the court. Some of it's been reconstructed. What did they place here that they really liked? What do you see here? Yeah. What was the thing with Romans and gardens? Even when they were in the empire and they were living in cities and doing things like being merchants and running businesses, why did they have the gardens around still? What was that all about? What did they think it connected with?
The king farmers.
Yeah. Yeah, the idea that in the good old days, when they were farmers and they were simple and honest citizens, that those were the best days of Rome, and they wanted to hang on to that identity. And so you see that the room is based on the plan of the Greek temple, and that all of the important rooms in the house, like the servants' quarters, the kitchen, and the master bedroom, opened onto this. This is also from Pompeii. It's a wall painting. The date is the same. Now, you could say early empire, but if you want a specific time in the early Christian calendar, when Pompeii was destroyed, what date would you put for that? What year did Pompeii get buried by Vesuvius? Guys who like numbers rather than terms, what's a specific year? Okay, another thing to check out. So you know why the murals were preserved here? In terms of the style, similar to other Roman portraits of the time. First of all, it plays a balance between verism and idealism. You want to show an individual person with distinctive features. You want to capture their individual likeness. And at the same time, at this point, you want to flatter them. You want to show them at their best. So, yeah, she looks distinctive. She looks the way that her friends could recognize her if they saw this painting. But she's also shown probably with any sort of defects, blemishes, toned down. Sort of like a modern airbrushing of a photo. So it represents a compromise between realism and idealism. It's also painted with the eyes facing front. So the portrait has a gaze that engages you. Remember that we think that Roman portraits were the forerunners of the later Byzantine icons. So those are the features of Roman portraiture that it displays. Now what she got in her hand, and what is all that about? What is she holding, and why is she shown with it? Yeah, she's got a pen and some sort of writing diptych. Now, what is the impression that this is trying to give of her? What is the image that's being sold to you? Yeah, she's smart, she's educated, she's conversant in philosophy and poetry. Now, is this necessarily the case? We don't know. We do know that some Roman women could read, but as we said, literacy at this time was far from universal. Only the upper classes were capable of reading and writing. So it's possible that she was reading and writing. It's also possible that this was just to give a false impression that she was quite sophisticated. Okay, this is a complex of buildings in Rome that was created at the beginning of a high empire. It's named after the emperor who put it together. What is this group of buildings in Rome called? It replaced the earlier center of town when this emperor came to power. Yes, Trajan's Forum. And so you know the emperor, it's obvious Trajan. Who was the architect? This is the poor dude who lost his head under Hadrian later for mouthing off to him. He's a Greek guy from Syria, so his name is... Another one to look up. Now, we call him an architect because he planned out all the buildings. He didn't, though, have an office in Rome where he hung out a shingle with a sign saying, Apollodorus of Damascus, architect at large. What was his actual training in? What did he do for Trajan before he built the Forum? What was his job? Build buildings, did something else with Trajan's conquests. Okay, another thing for you guys to look up. Now, you see here a number of different buildings. You see, first of all, a temple dedicated to Trajan. You see a library with two parts. One held Greek manuscripts, one held Latin manuscripts. You see Trajan's column, which covered his tomb. And you see here the Basilica Oppia. Oppia is Trajan's family name. And what was the function of this basilica here? What was its purpose? What activities went on, especially in the two apses at either end? You remember what the purpose of it was? There were two judges who sat here, so what was the use of the building? Well, the judges imply what? Yeah, it's a law court. And in general, what are the functions of basilicas in ancient Rome before Christianity was legalized? What sort of purposes are they used for? Are they temples? Are they religious buildings? What is their general function? We know one of them is a court of law. What is the others? Another thing to check out. Now, what happens after Christianity gets legalized? What do basilicas become used for then? Yeah, they're used for Christian churches, right? And where do we think the idea for the basilica came from? You have a rectangular building with 2 stories held up by columns. There's 2 possible architectural models for this. What is one that's obvious from another culture that the Romans admired? Yeah, Greek, which type of buildings? Yeah, Greek temples could be a model. Now, there's a more commonplace type of architectural arrangement that a basilica could represent an enclosed roof version of. What is that? Something we have still today all over Fresno.
Streets.
Yeah, that it could represent an enclosed street. Think of a mall, for example. You originally have the idea of a bunch of stores on a street, and then you create this roofed enclosure to house it. The basilica could be the same idea. And then you have the 2 libraries. Trajan's column has this relief that goes up around it in a spiral. What was contained in these 2 libraries that may have inspired the form of that relief, which seems to unfold as it goes up? Scrolls, yeah, the scrolls of the books in the library. Still in the High Empire, this is a type of object that is found in part of the Roman Empire which has a very dry climate and so allows these things to survive. Where are we at now? They're attached to mummies, so that should be a clue and a half. Okay, so they're found in Egypt. Now, a lot of these are made using a painting technique with a wax base for the paint. What do you call that technique? Some of you guys probably do it in some of your painting classes. Okay, it's on the study guide, actually. You can check it out. Now, there's 2 ideas of how these were made and used. One says that the painting was originally commissioned during the person's lifetime, and that was kept in their house on their wall when they were alive, just like you might keep photographs of yourself or of a loved one. And then, when the person died, this would be attached to the mummy, and the mummy would be kept around the house in a mix of Roman and Egyptian ancestor worship and venerated. And then over time, remember, the mummies would pile up. And because lifespans were so short, folks wouldn't remember even their grandparents. So you have an accumulation of stiffs who nobody recognizes anymore, and they start to get pretty stinky. So you have a big mummy spring cleaning and you take them to the cemetery. Now the alternative theory says that these paintings were made only when the person died. And they were carried in the funeral procession and then attached to the mummy. What evidence is there from the mummies themselves that would support the second theory? That would come from x-rays or from unwrapping the bodies? Yeah. In other words, that in many cases, the age of the person at death from the body seems to match the age that they're shown in the image as having attained. So, in relation to earlier Roman art, we saw that image of Pompeii. It's a continuity of the idea, first, of wanting to make sure that you have a portrait that shows an individual in a recognizable way. And second, it preserves this idea of ancestor worship. Now, what later Byzantine art form that's still with us today in some Christian churches might have developed out of these mummy panel portraits? What's that? No. What do you see in Greek Orthodox churches or Greek Orthodox homes? Name the same name as the name for things you've got on your computer that are images that link you to stuff. Icons, right? And so the theory is that, in the end of paganism, when Christianity was made legal and became the state religion, you can't pray to ancestors anymore as go-betweens between you and the folks upstairs. So what you've got instead now is Jesus and Mary and the saints as your mouthpiece. So they would be represented. Now, your textbook says that this guy is a priest of Serapis. Now, what's wrong with this identification that you see right full up here? What do you know about Egyptian priests which shows us that this is not one? Yeah, Egyptian priests were completely careless. They were shaved so they wouldn't bring any vermin or dirt into the sanctuary. This guy's got a full head of hair and a pretty bushy beard. So it's possible, therefore, that he was either a layperson, an ordinary guy who was particularly devoted to that god, or that he was a priest in training who died before he made the grade and needed to shave everything off. Okay, we're now in the late period of the Roman Empire, and this is a statue of Trebonianus Gallus. We also call this period of the Roman Empire by a name that comes from the fact that most of the emperors here were generals, came from the ranks of the army. What do we call this period of Roman history? The period of the... Nope. It's late empire, but what do you also call this particular time? Since the emperors are derived from the soldiers. Yeah, period of the barracks empires. Now, this is an attempt to create a heroic statue of him. It's a failure, though. Look at this dude. Looks like he's got a stash of steroids someplace. Unlike Greek art, which tried to show things all in balance and proportion, this guy's muscles are binding him. They're grotesque. They're huge. And he's got this big mountainous body, but he's got this little pinhead on top of it. And then look at the facial expression. Not exactly an air of confidence. This guy looks like he needs some pharmaceuticals, Prozac, Xanax, Zoloft, whatever he can get really, really quick. And why might the statues at this time have an anxious expression? What's going on in Roman society and history that might make emperors a bit worried? Yeah, the economy's shot. The barbarians are invading. The empire is lost. And what happened to this guy in particular that shows that he had good reason to be worried? He lived a short life. What happened to him? Only reigned for a couple of years, and then what? Well, there's a civil war that breaks out because he's seen as having failed to defend the empire, and he's killed in battle at this point. So yeah, there's reason to be worried because sometimes you expect that people are out to get you, and sometimes you're right. Okay. This is built by the first emperor to legalize Christianity. And so you know that it's an arch, so what's the name of the work of art? Yeah, the Arch of Constantine. Built in Rome. Date, again, you could say late empire, you could say around 325. Now with this one you have fudge room too, because you could also say early Christian or late antique. All of that is good. And this is a triumphal arch. It's not part of a building. It's a freestanding monument that's built to commemorate a victory or an event. What specific event is being honored here in Constantine's life? What battle does he win that's also supposedly instrumental in converting him to Christianity? What's that? Who does he fight? Yes, Maxentius. He defeats his rival Maxentius. Now, in terms of the construction materials here, this is recycled from the buildings of earlier rulers. Now, part of the reason is, as we said when we look at the barracks emperors, the empire is on the skids financially. It's kind of like the U.S. today. But there's another reason why he recycles things specifically from those emperors. Why? Well, yeah, we said that, but why only go to the high emperor's buildings? Why not vandalize and reuse anybody's stuff? Yeah, for propaganda purposes, to say, I'm like them. I'm a good ruler. I'm going to appoint people who know what's good for the government. I'm not going to be playing favorites. I'm going to be a good emperor and hold the empire together. So it's also a propaganda angle. Okay. Okay, this comes from Constantine's reign. And in terms of period, you can call this late Empire, you could also call this early Christian, or you could call it late Antique. The guy who was planted in here, this sarcophagus, his name was Julius Bassus, and he was a prefect, an official for Constantine in Rome. And what religion did he belong to, even though he actually didn't get baptized until he was nearly dead? What was Constantine and also baptized when he was nearly dead?
Christianity.
Yeah, so he's a Christian. So you have this scene, all these scenes here. The most important one is on the top. Who is this figure in the middle here? Clean shaven, beardless, looks like an adolescent kid. And he's got these two bearded men on either side, and he's sitting with his feet on this bearded man's head. What is all that about? Who is the character? It's Jesus, right? And he's associated here with Apollo. And Apollo would make sense for representing Jesus because he's the god of light with the sun. He's the god of philosophy, which Christianity was seen as one. And he's the patron of the emperor, and Jesus is the ruler of the world. He's got two apostles on either side. But who's the guy whose head he's using as a footstool? What mythological figure is this? He's the god of what? Wind. He's Aeolus, the god of the winds. So that shows us two things. First of all, if he's the god of the wind, that definitely places this scene up in the sky, in heaven. The other thing is that the four winds is a way of describing everything. It means the four cardinal directions. It means the whole universe. So by Jesus resting his feet on Aeolus' head, he's saying that he's the ruler of all that exists, of the whole cosmos. And then you need to know one of the other scenes, just one of the other scenes here. So here we have a scene from the Old Testament. It's a guy holding his son by the hair, and he's about to kill him, but an angel's coming along and telling him to stop. What scene is that? From the book of Genesis, what is that? Yeah, sacrifice of Abraham. Down below you have a character from the Bible who's known for being a huge complainer. After God allows Satan to test him by afflicting him with boils and plagues and killing his family, he's sitting on a pile of dung here talking to his friends. Who is that?
Job.
Job, yeah. And this one you should know. Got a tree with a snake around it and two naked people who are covering up. Adam and Eve. And then we have this character here who's on a donkey entering a city. Who is that? Doing what? What city is he entering? Jerusalem. Okay, so you just need to know one of those. Okay, this is a church in Rome. It's called Santa Sabina. If you like precise dates, we got them for this. It's built between 423 and 432 Christian era. But if you don't like precise dates, you can use the same set of terms we've been talking about. Early Christian, late Antique, late Empire. Again, it's based on a basilica. And since you know from our discussion of Trajan's Forum, before they were used for churches, basilicas were used for government buildings. They were used for law courts, they were used for schools, and they were used for military training. Now, why didn't the early Christians adopt the Greek peripheral temple as a model for a Christian church? One of the things is that they associated with paganism, and since those guys are beating up on them, they won't have any part of that. But there's a more practical reason why they didn't go for that. What's the story about the Greek and Roman temples that wouldn't have made them good for a Christian church? Yeah, too small. Christian houses of worship need to accommodate lots of folks, whereas the Greek temples have small interior spaces, and that wouldn't work out. Now, here you have this church. It's built 100 years after Old St. Peter's, which sort of sets the standard for Christian churches, but it shows that this is not yet taken as the only way to do things. What is absent in Santa Sabina that in St. Peter's runs across the church in front of the apse and the altar? Somebody mount it. What's not here? What do you call that part of the church that cuts across at a right angle and makes it look like a cross from above if you're looking at it? Yet, there's no transept here. So they can free to play around with their forms. Now, columns have a lot of carved foliage on them. So you know they're not Doric, you know they're not Ionic. What originally Greek column style that was very much liked by the Romans is this column style. Yeah, it's Corinthian. And where did they get these columns from? Did they go out and have people bang them out all fresh and new at this point? The empire's still not doing too well. Yeah, they're recycled. They're taken from pre-existing buildings. Okay, early Christian illuminated manuscript. It's named after the collector. It's called the Rossano Gospels. What scene from the Gospels is being shown in this illustration? What's happening to Jesus? Who is he with? Yeah, by Pilate. Yep. Irony of being, Jesus condemned by a Roman governor, and then several hundred years later you have a Roman official owning this book. Now, unlike earlier books, which were made out of papyrus, this one is made of animal material, made out of parchment. And you call these style of illustrating books manuscript illumination. Now, it's not a very good image, and it's also faded. Look, it's 1,500 years old. It has a right to be dull at this point. But originally, the page was dyed purple. What does this imply about the person who owned it or commissioned it? Yeah, they're rich. They're probably an emperor, actually, because that's the imperial color. And here, for the first time, you see Jesus represented with a beard and long hair. That's actually borrowed from pre-pagan gods. What are some of those gods that were used for this image of Jesus? You guys recognize easily. Somebody said it. Yeah, Zeus is one of them. Why would Zeus be equated with Jesus? Yeah, so ruler of the universe, lawgiver, all of that. Then there's a god called Serapis, the guy who the mummy portrait showed a devotee of. Now, Serapis is a combination of Zeus and Osiris. And you think about that, Osiris is a dead and resurrected god. So that makes sense to show him as a stand-in for Jesus. The third god is named Asclepius, and he's a god of healing. So, with Jesus' healing miracles described in the New Testament, this would be an appropriate figure to stand in for Jesus. So you just need to know one of those gods who the image was borrowed from. And then we have this dish, which comes from a site in England called Mildenhall. And this was found in a house. What religion did the owner belong to, as evidenced by the other stuff that the archaeologists dug up there? Yeah, he was a Christian. But the images on the dish are pagan. They show things from Greek and Roman mythology. How was he using these things? Did this mean that he actually was, doing double booking, believing in the Greek and Roman gods and in Jesus at the same time? What significance did these images have for him? Yeah, they were just decoration. They were just stories that could be used to make the things more interesting.